Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of clinical precision.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It is sort of like engineering, right? You break your arm and you go in, and the X-ray shows that jagged white line right across the radius.
Right. You can literally see it.
Exactly. The doctor just points at the film and says, well, there it is. There is the problem.
It is completely binary. I mean, we inherently crave that kind of visible certainty.
Yeah.
We want a physical substrate that we can just point to and fix.
But then, you step into the world of human consciousness and you start asking questions for this deep dive about neurodevelopment or like identity or even just the fundamental nature of what it actually means to be aware.
And suddenly that X-ray machine is totally useless.
Completely useless. We look at the diagnostic landscape of the mind and it is hopelessly murky. I mean, we are staring at this 3-pound lump of gray matter, looking for the person inside it and finding absolutely nothing but, wet tissue.
Which forces us to confront what might be, well, probably the ultimate mystery of human existence. The question that seems incredibly simple until you try to actually pin it down, which is, what exactly are you?
Right.
Like, where in that gray matter does the I reside? And philosophers, cognitive scientists, AI researchers, they have been banging their heads against this exact wall for decades.
And that is the wall we are going to completely deconstruct today. We are pulling heavily from a foundational collection in cognitive science and philosophy called The Mind's Eye. It was edited by Douglas Hofstadter and Daniel Dennett.
It is a classic.
It really is. And the mission for you, the listener, today is straightforward, but it is philosophically radical. We are going to completely dismantle your intuitive understanding of consciousness.
Oh, yeah. We are burning it to the ground.
Right. We are throwing out the idea of like a magical, ethereal soul sitting in a little control room behind your eyes.
Because it is a necessary demolition. To get to the truth of consciousness, we really have to start by abandoning a very specific, a very pervasive bias that we all have. We have to let go of our bio-chauvinism.
Bio-chauvinism. I love that term.
It is great, right? It is basically the assumption that biology has a total monopoly on thought.
Right. Like you need meat to think.
Exactly. It is this deeply ingrained prejudice that thinking and feeling and, conscious experience absolutely require squishy biological brains.
Yeah.
Because we happen to process information using carbon-based meat and wet neurons, we just sort of project that constraint onto the entire universe.
Yeah.
We assume meat and neurons are the only medium capable of producing a mind.
It is kind of a failure of imagination, honestly. It is like saying you can only write a novel using a fountain pen.
Oh, that is a great way to put it.
Right. And that a keyboard could never possibly produce literature because it doesn't use liquid ink.
That is a perfect parallel. To truly understand the architecture of consciousness, we have to strip away the biological medium completely. We have to look purely at the structural mechanics.
Just the mechanics.
Right. We have to examine the patterns of information processing, totally independent of the hardware that is actually running those patterns.
The pattern, not the medium. And, to get there, to really understand how a vibrant, feeling mind can be built out of completely mindless, dead parts, we have to tackle a massive paradox in how we view the universe.
We really do.
Let's look at the core conflict between reductionism and holism. Because if we do not resolve this right now, nothing else about the brain is going to make any sense.
So reductionism being the default setting for basically all modern science.
Right.
It is the premise that to understand any complex system, you just break it down into its smallest fundamental parts.
Yeah, you want to understand society, you study psychology. You want to understand psychology, you look at biology. Biology reduces to chemistry, chemistry reduces to physics.
Exactly. The causality always moves upward. The microscopic rules dictate the macroscopic reality. Upward causality.
But the sources today challenge that default setting by introducing this concept of downward causality.
Yes, downward causality is crucial.
Which is the idea that high-level macroscopic structures and abstract concepts can actually dictate the physical behavior of their microscopic components.
And that is where people usually trip up.
Oh, I have a really hard time buying downward causality on its face. It sounds like telekinesis.
It does sound like magic at first.
Let me push back on the physics of this for a second. If I raise my hand right now to ask a question, the reductionist explanation makes perfect physical sense to me.
Walk me through it.
Okay, so my neurons fired, right? Creating an electrical potential. That triggered a chemical release of neurotransmitters across the synapse. That chemical signal caused muscle fibers to contract, which physically pulled the calcium bones in my arm upward against gravity. Every single step is a physical force acting on physical matter.
It is a completely unbroken chain of microscopic, deterministic events.
Exactly. But downward causality implies that my abstract, non-physical desire to ask a question somehow reached down and moved physical electrons and atoms.
Right.
But if atoms only move because of fundamental physical forces, like, gravity, electromagnetism, strong and weak nuclear forces, a desire cannot exert a physical force.
Right, a desire isn't a force particle.
Right. So where is the actual physics happening? How is this not just invoking a ghost in the machine?
The friction you are feeling there is the exact reason downward causality is so controversial. But it is also so vital to understand. It feels like magic because we are totally trapped in a linear view of cause and effect.
Okay, so untrap us.
To demonstrate how downward causality operates without breaking a single law of physics, we really need to step away from biology completely. Let's look at the first mechanical thought experiment from the text. I want you to imagine a vast, just intricately connected network of dominoes.
Okay, dominoes. I am picturing like an endless gymnasium floor. Just millions of wooden dominoes set up in massive branching circuits.
Correct.
They split off, they run in parallel lines, they loop back on themselves.
Yes, but we need to add one crucial mechanical rule to make this network function dynamically. Underneath each domino is a tiny, time-delayed spring.
A spring.
Right. When a domino gets knocked over, it stays down for exactly 5 seconds, and then the spring pops it right back upright.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it is not a one-and-done cascade then.
Exactly.
Signals like waves of falling dominoes, they can race through this network, diverge, trigger other chains, and the pathways literally reset themselves behind the wave.
Yes, it is a mechanical circuit board.
That is wild.
It is a Turing-complete computer made entirely out of wood and springs. You can arrange these dominoes to create logic gates. You can build an AND gate where 2 separate lines of dominoes must fall simultaneously to knock over a third line.
Right, basic computing.
You can build an OR gate. You can create elaborate branching loops that hold information in memory. Anything a silicon microchip can do, this giant gymnasium of resetting dominoes can do. It is just much, much slower.
Okay, so if we have a mechanical circuit board, my instinct is to run a calculation through it.
Naturally.
But if we run a math problem, how does that prove anything about consciousness or downward causality?
Because it proves that causality depends entirely on the level of observation. Let's program this massive network to perform a specific complex mathematical task.
Okay.
We are going to arrange the dominoes to find the prime factors of the number 641.
All right, so we tip the first domino, and the cascade begins. Waves of falling wood are sweeping across the gymnasium, splitting, looping, calculating.
And you and I are standing on a balcony watching this enormous mechanical process unfold.
Like looking down at a maze.
Exactly. And you point to one very specific domino in a particular isolated stretch of the network. You watch it for an hour, and you ask me, why isn't this one particular domino over here ever falling down?
Okay, so applying the reductionist view, the answer is incredibly simple.
What is it?
I look at the physical forces. That specific domino is not falling because the domino immediately behind it has not struck it with sufficient kinetic energy to overcome its center of gravity.
Which is 100% physically accurate. No laws of physics are broken. But notice how completely devoid of explanatory power that answer actually is.
Yeah, because if I ask why the domino behind it didn't fall, you just point to the domino behind that one.
Right. It becomes an infinite regress of totally meaningless physical facts. It tells you absolutely nothing about the nature of the system as a whole.
So what is the real answer?
The real answer, the only answer that actually explains the phenomenon is because 641 is a prime number.
Wow. That is a staggering shift in perspective.
Isn't it? The physical state of that wooden block remaining upright against the pull of gravity and potential kinetic energy is entirely dictated by a macroscopic, abstract mathematical truth.
The primeness.
Yes, the primeness of 641 is the ultimate cause of the physical behavior of the wood.
But the domino itself is just a dumb piece of wood. It doesn't know it's participating in a prime factorization algorithm.
Exactly.
It has no awareness of mathematics at all. It is just blindly obeying local Newtonian physics. And yet its overarching physical destiny is governed by a high-level concept.
The rules of the whole system constrain the behavior of the parts. That is downward causality. The abstract doesn't exert a new, magical physical force. Rather, the architecture of the system channels the existing physical forces such that the microscopic parts have literally no choice but to physically manifest the macroscopic truth.
So mapping that back to the bio-chauvinistic human brain, my neurons are the dominoes.
A single neuron doesn't know what a deep dive is. It doesn't know what a question is. It has no concept of an arm or gravity or vocal cords.
Right.
It just measures the chemical gradients across its membrane and either fires an action potential or it doesn't.
But the architecture of those 86 billion neurons creates a system where an abstract concept like my desire to ask a question acts as the structural constraint. My desire is the mathematical equivalent of the primeness of 601. It dictates which neural dominoes are permitted to fall.
Exactly.
So downward causality isn't telekinesis at all. It's structural determinism. The pattern drives the medium.
And once you accept that an abstract pattern can control physical matter without invoking a soul,
Yeah.
you've taken the very first step toward building a mind.
Right.
But the domino analogy, while it is mathematically elegant, has a pretty big limitation.
It's entirely rigid.
Yeah.
It is a fixed algorithm. A domino computer can solve a math problem, but it doesn't have a personality. It doesn't have moods. It can't, learn from its environment or change its own mind.
Right. It is just executing code.
To get closer to actual consciousness, we need a system that is fluid, dynamic, and capable of emergent identity.
Which brings us to one of the most brilliant and honestly most bizarre thought experiments in the entire collection. We really need to examine Anne Hillary.
Aunt Hillary is fascinating. Now, to you, the listener, Aunt Hillary is not a human person. Aunt Hillary is a conscious, highly articulate, intelligent ant colony.
Yes.
And through her, we are going to explore the self as an illusion. We're going to see how a continuous, singular identity can be constructed out of completely disconnected, totally mindless components that are constantly dying and being replaced.
Right. To understand how Aunt Hillary actually thinks, we have to look at the phase transitions of intelligence. We have to look at the hierarchy of organization within the nest.
So at the absolute lowest level, you have the individual ants, and the text makes it painfully clear. Individual ants are utterly devoid of intelligence.
Totally blank.
They are the wet dominoes. They wander around pseudo-randomly, driven by incredibly simple local stimuli, like a bit of pheromone here, a bit of food there. They have no big picture awareness of the colony whatsoever.
They're purely reactive machines.
Mm-hmm.
But a shift happens when a certain density of ants interacts. When a threshold is crossed, their random, localized activities begin to reinforce each other through chemical trails. And they form what the text calls teams.
Teams. So a group of ants might form like a foraging team or a trail building team.
Yes.
The team itself has a coherent, goal-oriented function, even though not a single ant inside that team has the capacity to understand what a goal even is.
Exactly. The team is a higher order structure, but it doesn't stop there. Multiple teams interact and group together to form signals. Signals are massive waves of coordinated activity that physically travel through the colony. They migrate across the nest, carrying complex information from one sector to another, altering the behavior of other teams, and then just sort of dissolving once their task is completed.
So they are basically like the electrical impulses traveling down a neural pathway in a brain.
That is exactly what they map onto. And at the absolute highest level of this hierarchy, these signals combine to form symbols.
Okay, symbol.
Symbols are persistent, highly active, complex subsystems that represent abstract concepts. When Aunt Hillary experiences a thought or a feeling or remembers a past event, it is physically manifested as the activation and interaction of these high-level symbols across the entire ant estate.
It is the ultimate stadium card stunt.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Like when you look at the bleachers during a halftime show, the individual fan in row G is just an ant.
Right.
They are holding up a blue piece of cardboard just because the guy next to them is holding one up. They have literally no idea what the larger image is. But from a blimp 2,000 feet in the air, you see a giant, coherent, moving portrait of a tiger roaring.
Exactly. The fan is the medium. The roaring tiger is the symbol.
But Aunt Hillary isn't just a static portrait. She learns. She adapts to her environment.
She does.
And to understand how she retains memory and personality despite the constant turnover of individual ants, we have to look at what they call the caste distribution.
Right. The caste distribution is key here. This is the dynamic ratio of the different types of ants within the colony, right?
Yeah, the fluctuating percentages of workers, soldiers, foragers, and nurses.
That shifting ratio is the physical encoding of the colony's state of mind. As the colony interacts with the world, The environment exerts pressure on the nest. If a predator attacks, the distribution shifts heavily toward soldiers. If a big source of food is discovered, it shifts toward foragers.
But it is not just a momentary reaction,
No,
right?
not at all.
The caste distribution takes time to return to a baseline, and the baseline itself can slowly alter over time based on accumulated experiences.
Right.
The ever-changing balance of those castes is the colony's memory. It is the physical repository of Aunt Hillary's knowledge.
If you only stare at the individual ants, you are completely blind to the intelligence. You have to read the caste distribution, the symbol level, to actually communicate with the mind.
Which introduces one of the most surreal characters in the entire text.
Oh, the anteater.
The anteater. The anteater is actually best friends with Aunt Hillary. He visits her estate, and they have these deep, hours-long philosophical conversations.
And you have to ask, how mechanically does an anteater talk to an ant colony?
Right. So the anteater takes a stick and draws physical trails in the dirt. He introduces a structural change to the environment.
Yeah.
The mindless ants encounter these new trails, they react to the disruption locally, and that disruption ripples upward, shifting the caste distribution. Through that shift, new signals and symbols emerge. Aunt Hillary replies by forming new trails of her own, altering the terrain in a way that the anteater, from his macroscopic, blimp-like vantage point, can read as coherent linguistic thoughts.
They're literally communicating across distinct levels of systemic organization. The anteater speaks in environment, and Hillary speaks in caste distribution.
And the text includes this brilliant, just deeply ironic political dynamic.
It is so funny.
And Hillary, at the symbol level, is a staunch libertarian. Politically, she believes in absolute personal freedom, laissez-faire capitalism, the complete sovereignty of the individual.
While her physical body, the ants themselves, operate as a blindly sacrificial, fiercely communist society. The individual ant has no rights, no freedom, and gives its life without a second of hesitation for the collective.
It perfectly illustrates that the nature of the medium does not dictate the nature of the message.
Not at all.
The physical components can operate on principles completely antithetical to the emergent mind they are creating.
Yeah.
But the supreme irony, the darkest and really most revealing moment in their relationship, centers around the anteater's diet.
Well, he is, after all, an anteater. His biological imperative is to consume ants.
And Aunt Hillary knows this. As a gesture of friendship, she permits him to eat from her estate. So while they are deep in a philosophical debate, the anteater is actively reading her high-level thoughts.
Right.
And he notices that the active symbols currently forming in her caste distribution translate to the thought. Help yourself to any of the ants that look appetizing.
The invitation is officially extended.
And what does the anteater do? He reaches down and eats the exact specific ants that are physically composing that very thought.
The ants are literally being crushed and digested to express the macroscopic concept that gives permission for them to be eaten.
And they have absolutely no idea. The ants are completely unconscious of the irony of their own deaths. They are just following chemical trails, totally oblivious to the fact that their local actions are spelling out their own execution order at the symbol level.
It is a phenomenal demonstration of how decoupled the mind really is from the parts. The thought survives the destruction of the neurons conveying it.
Yes.
But this leads to the most poignant and perhaps most terrifying concept regarding the self as an illusion. We have to talk about the death of JSF.
Oh, JSF. So JSF was the ant colony that lived on that exact same plot of land before Aunt Hillary existed.
Right. JSF was an entirely different person, a brilliant, mathematically gifted colony with its own unique personality, its own memories, its own conversational style.
Yeah.
But one season, a massive, catastrophic flood washed through the estate.
The waters rise, the nest is inundated, but the ants themselves do not die.
No, they don't. Ants are remarkably resilient. They clung to twigs, they formed living rafts, they floated above the torrents. Physically, the biological components of the colony survived the flood completely intact. Not a single ant was actually lost.
But the organization was completely annihilated.
Yes, the delicate network of teams and signals and symbols was totally washed away. The specific caste distribution that encoded JSF's memories and mathematical genius was entirely scrambled by the chaos of the water.
And when the floodwaters finally receded, those exact same surviving ants regrouped on the mud.
But JSF did not return.
No.
When those same biological components rebuilt the nest, a completely new overarching organization emerged from the altered environment. They formed Aunt Hillary.
Wow.
A completely different mind, with different politics, different conversational rhythms, and absolute zero memory of ever being JSF.
I want to pause here and really apply this to you, the listener, because the implications of this are honestly haunting. Think about your own identity. You are Aunt Hillary.
You really are.
Your neurons, your synaptic connections, they are the ants. You feel like you have a distinct personality, you have a childhood, you have a sense of continuity that you call me.
You feel like a permanent substance.
Exactly. But if a neurosurgeon could hypothetically go into your skull and scramble the organization of your neurons, even if they kept every single biological cell perfectly alive, healthy, and oxygenated, you would die.
The physical matter survives, but the person is extinguished.
Because the self as an illusion means that the self is not a thing. It is not a physical object hiding in the center of your brain. It is purely an emergent pattern.
Right.
It is the song being played by the orchestra. If the orchestra stops playing Beethoven and starts playing jazz, Beethoven is gone, even if all the instruments and musicians are exactly the same.
This maps perfectly onto neurodegenerative conditions. It explains why severe traumatic brain injury or like advanced Alzheimer's can fundamentally alter a personality, sometimes replacing it entirely.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
The neural dominoes are still physically present, but the pathways have been altered by the biological flood. The symbols are different, the caste distribution is shifted, the self is incredibly fragile because it only exists as a sustained pattern of organization.
Okay. I am intellectually on board with the self as an illusion. I see how identity is a pattern, but I am going to push back again because Aunt Hillary still feels incomplete to me.
How so?
Well, she is a great metaphor for memory and static identity, but she is fundamentally reactive.
Reactive in what sense?
The anteater draws a line, she reacts to it. The environment floods, she shifts her caste distribution. A predator approaches, she spawns soldiers. It is all input-output. How does a purely mechanical system actually acquire a will of its own? How does it initiate action without a prompt? Because sitting here, I feel like I make proactive choices. I don't just react to stimuli, I originate intent. How do we build volition out of mindless parts?
That's the necessary next step. To explain volition, we must move to our third mechanical analogy from the source material.
Yeah.
The thinking wind chime.
The thinking wind chime. Okay.
We have to explore how a system's internal state interacts with its environment to produce what we call choice.
Walk us through the physical setup of this wind chime.
All right, picture a massive, incredibly intricate mobile hanging from the ceiling of a large room. It is made of hundreds of thousands of tiny, delicate glass tinklers.
Okay, I see it.
These tinklers hang from small branches, which are suspended from larger branches, which ultimately connect to a central trunk. It is a vast tree of glass and wire.
Silent and static.
Until a natural breeze blows through an open window.
Right.
The wind hits the outer layer of the chime. The glass tinklers flutter, they strike one another, and the kinetic energy ripples upward through the branches. The entire physical structure of the mobile begins to alter. It twists, it rotates, it shimmers. The tension in the wires shifts.
So the external environment, the wind, is altering the internal state of the chime.
And here's the foundational mechanic of memory. The new, altered shape of the wind chime dictates exactly how it will respond to the next breeze.
Oh, I see.
If a major branch is now twisted 45 degrees to the left, the next gust of wind will strike the glass tinklers at a completely different angle than if it had remained stationary.
The chime is accumulating a physical history. Its current geometric state is like a compressed record of every single gust of wind that has ever hit it.
Yes. Its current state represents its past, and that state rigidly determines its future behavior. But, as you pointed out, a standard wind chime is still just reactive.
Yeah, it's just waiting for the wind.
Exactly. To grant a volition, we have to upgrade the system.
We have to close the loop.
Precisely. Suppose we install dozens of mechanical fans on motorized tracks around the perimeter of the room.
Fans on tracks, okay.
And the position, the angle, and the speed of these fans are electronically hardwired to the precise angles of specific high-level branches deep within the wind chime itself.
Okay, this is where it gets absolutely wild. So if a natural breeze comes in and twists a specific branch deep in the canopy, that physical twist sends an electronic signal that moves a fan on the wall.
Right.
And that fan turns on and blows a completely new artificial gust of wind back onto the chime.
Yes, the system is now interacting with its own environment. And let's add one more layer to this.
Okay, more layers.
We attach mechanical arms and hands to the walls of the room, and the movements of those hands are controlled by the twisting of other specific branches within the chime.
So now, the external world and the chime's internal state are hopelessly, inextricably entangled in a feedback loop.
Hopelessly entangled.
A natural breeze blows in. The chime shimmers, absorbing the data. A branch twists. That twist activates a fan. The fan blows wind back onto the chime, altering its state further. That new shimmer twists a different branch, which triggers a mechanical hand to reach out and actually manipulate an object in the room.
It is a massive, self-perpetuating cascade of interaction. The chime perceives its environment, alters its internal state, changes the environment based on that state, and then perceives the environment again.
And the text provides a stunning thought experiment to demonstrate what this feedback loop is actually capable of.
It really does.
Imagine there is a chessboard set up in the room. The wind is blowing, the fans are whirring, the glass is shimmering. Suddenly, driven by this chaotic cascade of moving branches, one of the mechanical hands reaches down, picks up a knight, and executes a brilliant, master-level, highly strategic chess move.
And the immediate intuitive assumption is that it must be an accident.
Right. If I walk into a room and see a wind chime accidentally play a Bobby Fischer chess move, my first thought is, well, that was the luckiest, most statistically improbable gust of wind in the history of the universe.
But if you understand the system, you realize it is not luck at all. It is not a coincidence. The chime's internal geometric state has developed representational power.
Representational power.
Just as Aunt Hillary's caste distribution represented the terrain of her estate, the specific twists, tensions, and angles of the branches in the wind chime represent the state of the chessboard.
Okay, wait. Explain how that representation actually works mathematically. How does glass and wire represent a knight on e4?
Through the accumulated history of interaction. As the chime plays chess over countless games, meaning as the state of the board alters the environment, which blows wind on the chime, which moves the hands, the system's physical structure is sculpted.
Oh, I see. Like evolution.
Sort of, yes. Pathways of tension that lead to losing moves are disrupted by the resulting winds of the game's environment. Pathways that lead to advantageous positions are reinforced. The physical tension in the wires literally becomes an encoded memory of chess strategy.
So when the chime is presented with a specific board state, the wind of that visual data hits a structure that's been specifically tuned by history to respond in only one physical way.
Exactly. The system has volition. It has encoded tendencies towards certain future configurations. It wants to win the game, not through a magical feeling of desire, but because its physical architecture has been sculpted to inevitably produce the winning move when triggered by the right state.
That completely redefines free will. Let's connect this directly to your brain, the listener, because you are a wind chime. Your brain is a dark, silent, squishy box locked inside the vault of your skull.
It really is. It's totally dark in there.
It has absolutely no direct contact with reality. It is receiving sensory wind from your optic nerves, your auditory canals, the nerve endings in your skin.
It is constantly being bombarded by the breeze of the external world.
But it is not just passively fluttering in the breeze. Your brain is constantly blowing wind on itself.
Yes. Every thought you process, every memory you recall, is an internal gust of wind that physically changes the structure of your neural branches. The synapses strengthen or weaken. The physical shape of your network alters.
Right.
And that new altered structure determines exactly how you will react to the next external event, or even the next internal thought.
You are a thinking wind chime, intricately reacting to your own shimmering state. When you make a choice, when you decide what to eat for dinner, or what career to pursue your volition, isn't a ghost stepping in to pull a lever.
No ghost.
Your choice is the incredibly complex, mathematically beautiful, deterministic sum of your entire life's history of shimmering. The choice makes itself based on the tension of your neural wire.
It is a self-documenting history of interactions. Your free will is just the macroscopic experience of your microscopic determinism.
Okay, we have covered immense ground, but we are approaching the summit here. We have dismantled the ghost in the machine. We understand that downward causality allows abstract concepts to govern physical matter through systemic constraints.
Yes.
We understand through Aunt Hillary that the self as an illusion means identity is a fragile emergent pattern. We understand through the wind chime that volition is just the shimmering history of internal state.
We have successfully built a mind from completely mindless parts.
We have, but there is still a massive missing piece. The elephant in the room.
And what is that?
None of these mechanical metaphors actually feel like me.
Oh, right.
I can comprehend them intellectually, I can accept the math, but I do not feel like a wind chime. I don't feel like a shifting caste distribution of ants.
What do you feel like?
I feel like an eye. I feel like I have an inner eye. When I look out at the world, I feel like there is a singular, central, unified observer sitting inside my head, just sort of watching the movie of my life play out on a screen.
Right, the homunculus.
If the self as an illusion is true, why is it so incredibly convincing? Why does it feel so undeniably real to be a subject?
This is where we arrive at the ultimate secret of consciousness, the final, unifying concept that explains the subjective experience of being alive. To explain why you feel like an eye, we must finally explore the self-referential loop.
The self-referential loop. Let's break this down meticulously. Let's start with the problem of the inner eye, because that intuition is really the hardest thing to shake.
The intuitive belief that there is a little person inside your head, a homunculus, sitting in a control room watching the sensory data on a monitor, is completely logically bankrupt. It creates an infinite regress.
Right, because if there is a little guy in my head watching a screen, you have to ask, how does he see the screen?
Exactly. Does he have an even tinier little person inside his head watching a smaller screen? And does that tinier person have an even tinier person inside them?
It is Russian nesting dolls all the way down.
It's a logical dead end. It explains absolutely nothing about how awareness actually functions physically.
The feeling of I cannot come from an internal observer. The observer must be an illusion generated by the structure of the system itself.
The awareness has to emerge from a self-referential lip. And the text gives us the most perfect, vivid, mechanical metaphor for this concept. I want you to picture a standard video camera hooked up to a television monitor.
Okay. A very basic closed-circuit setup. The camera points at a room, and the television screen displays what the camera sees.
But now you take the video camera off the tripod, and you physically turn it around so that its lens is pointing directly at the center of the television screen it is plugged into.
Oh man, okay, so you create a direct feedback circuit. The camera sees the screen, but the screen is displaying what the camera sees, which is the screen, which is displaying the screen.
What happens visually on the monitor?
You get a self-referential L-up. You get this mesmerizing, endless tunnel of screens within screens, just receding off into a dark, infinite center point.
Right. But if that static, perfectly aligned tunnel was all the system produced, it would be a neat optical trick, but it wouldn't be a metaphor for consciousness. But what happens when you perturb that self-referential looper? What happens when the system is imperfect?
That is where the complexity explodes into something resembling a mind. If you slightly tilt the camera on its axis, or if you zoom the lens in just a fraction of an inch, the self-referential loop ceases to be a boring, static tunnel.
Right, it breaks the symmetry.
The slight error in the angle is fed back into the monitor, multiplied by the next frame, fed back again, multiplied again.
The imperfections compound at the speed of light.
It begins to distort. The tunnel collapses into beautiful, chaotic, unpredictable, spiraling fractal patterns, blooming mandalas of light that swirl and evolve and seem to have a living, breathing autonomy of their own.
And consider the physics of the setup.
Yeah.
The electronic signal takes a microsecond to travel down the wire from the camera to the screen. The phosphors on the television monitor take a fraction of a millisecond to decay and redraw the image. The camera lens has tiny physical imperfections in the glass.
So the physical constraints of the medium, the latency, the graininess, the lag, become the raw material for the fractals. The self-referential loop is digesting its own physical limitations and turning them into infinite complexity.
Now let us apply this self-referential loop directly to the human brain, because this is the architecture of your soul.
Let's do it.
Your brain operates on two distinct levels. It has a low-level physiological substrate. The firing neurons, the chemical cascades, the wet dominoes, the ants.
That's the hardware.
And it has a high-level symbol system. Words, ideas, abstract concepts, memory.
In macroscopic patterns and Hillary's caste distribution.
Yes. When your brain processes the world, it does not possess the capacity to perceive its own low-level state. When you are frightened, your brain doesn't perceive millions of individual neurons firing or the exact micrograms of cortisol flooding your amygdala.
Right.
It perceives its own state, summarized in the form of an articulated high-level concept.
You don't think my HPA axis is currently activated. You think, I feel nervous.
Exactly. The camera is pointing at the screen. The brain is looking at its own overarching state.
But here is the critical, magical moment of the self-referential loop.
Yeah.
That high-level concept, I feel nervous, does not just vanish into the ether. It is instantly fed back into the system as a brand new piece of sensory input.
It acts exactly like the mechanical fan blowing a new gust of wind back onto the chime.
Yes, you generate the concept, I feel nervous. That concept acts as a downward causing constraint. It physically alters the structure of your neurons. Your neurons shift their firing patterns to accommodate this new input,
Which fundamentally changes your internal state.
which causes the brain to summarize this new state, resulting in a new high-level concept. Wait, why am I nervous? I shouldn't be nervous. Great, now I'm anxious about being nervous.
Right.
Which feeds back into the neurons, changing them again, generating the thought, okay, I need to calm down.
It is an endless, cascading, swirling vortex of self-perception. The brain perceives itself. That very perception alters the brain, which alters the next perception ad infinitum.
That is the human self-referential loop. The infinite regress isn't a little man in control room. It is the mathematical feedback of the system endlessly processing its own output.
And that latency we talked about with the camera, the delay in the electronic signal that exists in the brain too. It takes milliseconds for a neural signal to traverse the cortex.
Right, there's a lag.
The brain is never perceiving itself in the absolute present. It is always perceiving the echo of its state from a fraction of a second ago. That tiny temporal gap, that lag in the feedback loop, is the space where consciousness blooms. It is the graininess that allows the fractals to form.
I want to push this to the absolute philosophical limit because this is the crux of the entire deep dive. Is the self as an illusion just a cynical parlor trick?
What do you mean?
Am I just being fooled by my own biology into thinking I matter, or is this illusion a structural reality? Am I literally the macroscopic whirlpool created when the brain thinks about itself thinking?
Well, to answer that, you have to ask how we define reality. If a whirlpool forms in a river, is the whirlpool an illusion?
I mean, it's just water.
Right. It is not a distinct, rigid object. You cannot reach into the river and pull the whirlpool out. It has no permanent physical substance. The water molecules composing it are constantly flowing in and flowing out.
So in a strict reductionist sense, the whirlpool doesn't exist. It's just moving water.
But the whirlpool has causal power. It can exert force. It can sink a passing boat. It can carve the rock of the riverbed. A pattern with causal power is real. The self as an illusion does not mean you do not exist. It means you do not exist as a substance.
You are not a noun. You are a verb.
Exactly. You are the self-referential loop. You are a continually self-documenting world line. The system perceives itself, and that very act of perception becomes the next physical state of the system.
Wow.
The I that you feel so deeply, the persistent inner I, is quite literally the eye of this self-referential typhoon. It is the calm center of a chaotic, feedback-driven storm of information.
The eye of the typhoon. That is a stunning way to visualize it. Let's pull all of this together and look at the vast ground we have covered today. We started by looking at that broken X-ray machine. We realized that searching for a physical soul in the meat of the brain is just a fool's errand.
We abandoned our bio-chauvinism and completely embraced the structural mechanics of thought.
We looked at the giant gymnasium of prime number dominoes, and we realized that downward causality isn't telekinesis or magic. High-level mathematical truths and abstract concepts really can dictate the physical movements of wood or electrons or muscle fibers through the architecture of the system.
The rules of the whole determine the destiny of the parts.
Then we spent time with Aunt Hillary, the ant colony. We saw the self as an illusion, proven by the fact that identity is just an emergent pattern, a caste distribution. If you scramble the ants, the genius of JSF dies and the libertarian in Aunt Hillary is born. The pattern is the person, the medium is disposable.
We built the thinking wind chime to demonstrate how a completely physical system acquires volition, how the shimmering, accumulated history of interactions physically encodes the ability to play chess or to make choices. Free will is the macro experience of microdeterminism.
And finally, we closed the circuit with the TV camera pointing at the screen. We saw that the magical, undeniable feeling of I, the inner observer, is nothing more and nothing less than a beautifully complex self-referential loop.
Yes.
We are the fractals blooming on the monitor of our own self-perception. We are the whirlpool in the river of our own neural activity.
It is a radically different but profoundly beautiful way to view your own existence. You are not a ghost trapped inside a machine made of meat. You are the magnificent, mathematically sublime pattern of the machine observing itself.
So, as we wrap up this journey into the architecture of the mind, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over tonight. I want you to think about the physical reality of your own body. Biology dictates that the cells in your body are entirely replaced over the span of several years.
Your skin sheds, your organ tissue turns over, your bone marrow regenerates. The molecules in your neurons are metabolized and replaced.
The physical parts that made up your body 10 years ago are largely gone. They have been excreted, washed away, returned to the earth. Furthermore, every single time you learn something new, every time you suffer a heartbreak, every time you experience joy, your self-referential loopy changes shape slightly.
Right, the fractals shift, the wind chime twists.
The pattern is constantly rewriting itself based on new feedback. So if the physical cells of the you from a decade ago are literally biologically gone, and the structural pattern of your loop has shifted, are you actually the same person you were 10 years ago?
It's a great question.
Or are you just a brand new arrangement of biological dominoes inheriting the fragile memory of a self-referential loop that technically no longer exists?
It really forces you to rethink what that X-ray was ever trying to show us.
The diagnostic machine is broken because there was never a solid bone of identity to photograph in the first place. There was only the shimmering pattern twisting in the wind. Keep shimmering, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.